1, which is SIG architecture. I'm Sana Tariq again with chair of SIG architecture, and I have Kaushik, principal software engineer at Google, working as vice chair for SIG architecture. In this quick use case discussion, we will give you an update of our SIG architecture community, our progress to date, what we are focusing on now, and then we will review on our view into 2023 and beyond on what we are trying to accomplish for the community. And we'll also help you understand how the SIG architecture community is working with the SIG 2 and 3 to work on our releases and future deliverables in the community. With that, we'll give you a quick recap into what we have accomplished so far as a community since inception. So we came up with the Nephio design principles, and the doc is shared in this tab. If you receive the slides after which we'll upload to the wiki, you should be able to get to these resources, the ones that I'm mentioning here. We walked the community through the Nephio design principles and goals, and the contributors for that were shown under this left-hand side. Then we needed the community to give us requirements on how they want to see Nephio solving our problems for immediate releases and the long-term releases. And we gathered that document, which is captured here. You might be able to find that link once the wikis has these sites available. We've found an opportunity with the community members to present their use cases and their requirements, which happened last year in October. And many different companies actually contributed to that, and which actually helped us shape the Nephio vision and its roadmap as well, looking at the short-term challenges and pains for the community members and what they want to see being solved with Nephio and how they want to see Nephio evolving to solve some of the longer-term challenges for their automation. And from that effort, we came up with the R1 user stories document, which was also discussed and consolidated with the community's help, and it was presented in SIG architecture on October 2nd. And the user stories were also refined. We'll discuss those user stories. So basically, we started working with the free 5GC. At the state where the Nephio project was evolving, this was the easiest and the fastest option for us to work without going into the license constraints and not having a lot of vendor-specific information in it. So start working with the free 5GC network functions to show the working of Nephio and share with industry how we can write the operators and CRDs for that simplest use case. So we took their UPF and SMF, two network functions. For the user story number 2, we approached the horizontal and vertical scaling of the user plane in the UPF. So the document actually has more details on how we would accomplish the horizontal and vertical scaling, but basically upgrading the existing resources on the UPF, that is scale up actually, and then deploy a new UPF, which is the scale out. It's a part of our user story number 2. And in the user story number 3, we are focusing on the control plane, which is SMF. We upgrade the existing resources of the SMF, and then we're also trying to extend the number of PDU sessions by deploying an additional SMF. So extending the control plane is a part of user story number 3, and the user plane is a part of user story number 2. That's the focus of R1. And to be able to further refine and trying to find the user stories and trying to link it with the user journeys, we started refining our user stories in the beginning of 2023. And then we worked with the community to start another initiative, which was identifying the roles and responsibilities as they're represented across various organizations. So we wanted to ask community to give us input on the given user stories to come up with user journeys. And that document was actually shared with the community in the January 2023. And the document is still up for inputs, and we are expecting more service providers to actually go into that document and share how they would see the user journey over these 3 use cases. It's a simplistic, small scope on the use cases at the moment for the R1 focus, but eventually this exercise will give us a lot more vision into how the roles and responsibilities are actually functioning over the execution of these user journeys, how various organizations represent a common denominator. So we'll continue to work on this exercise and constantly get feedback from community to make sure that the Nephio community is working on something which is relevant to the telco community in the service provider space on how the environment is executing. And one more realization that we have been happening over this first quarter of the new year. We need to extend the functioning of the SIG arc to be able to look at some of the long-term roadmap and extend our reach and collaboration across other industry projects and other open source communities, which is going to be a function of the SIG arc. And myself and Kaushik are going to work on additional proposals so that we can build that synergy with our additional two SIGs and to reach out to the cross-community collaboration and build some synergies with the other open source projects. So that's work in progress. And of course, myself and Kaushik will bring those ideas to community to hear from them, and at the same time, continue to work on our proposals to the TSC. With that, I'm going to ask Kaushik to take over and walk us through the next few slides. Kaushik?
Maybe double muted. Mic is live according to Zoom.
Okay, we'll give Kaushik a couple of minutes. He was online with me. We were chatting, so I think he's coming in.
Hello?
Yes, Kaushik, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. So just a little bit focusing on the design principle. So while Sana talked about the user stories, let's just quickly recap the key design principles that are driving not just R1 user stories, but how the lens in which we are looking at the roadmap beyond R1. And some of this will be repetitive because you heard in the previous session with Kandan and Sana. But the first principle is KRM and configuration as database, common and consistent framework for automation with extensibility for vendors for lifecycle management of cloud infrastructure, network functions, and the configuration for those. The second design principle is how do we enable inter-network function as well as dependencies between NF and infrastructure to be able to be managed using Kubernetes declarative techniques and be able to specify and enforce those dependencies. Third one, again, this is fairly important, which is unlike many other service orchestration systems out there, being able to have distributed actuation and reconciliation of intent as a way to scale to large scale cluster deployments, especially as we look at RAN and other IoT based capabilities. This becomes especially important. And then last but not the least, how do we package all of this in a way that improves user experience for all the personas, right from day 0 to day 2 of Nephio? And then coming on to the design goals for Nephio, just kind of driving from the principles. First goal is to standardize these CRDs for infrastructure and NF deployments while allowing for flexibility for vendor extensions. We encourage community members to bring all their CRDs into Nephio community, and where possible, also bring their operators. So that's on first design goal. The second design goal is defining interfaces and pluggability for Kubernetes operators. And I think some of the earlier discussions, as I was listening about PNF and other brownfield use cases, this becomes especially important to have a pluggable architecture where anyone can bring their own operators that can integrate seamlessly into brownfield systems of various kinds. And the third is defining an end-to-end automation framework for infrastructure automation, NF deployment, and configuration. These are the three layers that you had seen in the previous deck, all of those being able to be done in a declarative manner. Any questions on the principles and goals? All right, next slide, please. Perfect. So, kind of building upon what Sana was describing. Again, please treat this as not the full spectrum, but some of the key topics that have come up in the discussions in the various SIGs. So, in terms of user functionalities or user stories, there are many cloud providers that are today participating in Nephio. So, we are looking at, again, through the same pluggable architecture that I described earlier, how do we build Nephio to be truly multi-cloud? So that's one angle. The second dimension is multi-vendor on the same lines, right? So being able to have both permutations of cloud providers and vendors, all driven through the common, design goals that I just described earlier. And the last dimension is multi-domain. So today with R1, we are starting with core network as the domain, but then the overarching goal is to be a multi-domain orchestrator, right? So there are very interesting ongoing conversations with community members to look at transport and wireline kind of domain orchestration. We'll continue to drive progress on describing the requirements and architecture towards those. Fourth one, day zero focus. Again, a lot of the early user stories are more focused on day 1 and 2, but we want to be able to solve a network design persona, scenarios where persona like network design engineer should be able to specify NF topology spanning all these domains and being able to translate those through CRDs into each network function actuation. The next few are somewhat things that need to be better defined, but somewhat getting into the service layer, a layer above each network function. How do we define these higher level service constructs? So things like how do we manage lifecycle of network slices, or being able to provide some of the capabilities of service orchestration as an example. These are things that need discussion in the community, but things that have come up for potential roadmap. And lastly, scalability. This is a key topic that often is hard to figure out early on, but is important to get the design right. So the community will stay focused on ensuring both the requirements and the architecture is flexible to support large scale deployments, especially as we extend into radio network domain. I will pause for a second before I go to the next buckets of CRDs and control plane. Any questions until now? Okay. In the CRDs and operators, kind of borrowing from the design goals, we need to establish clear standards, and standards meaning guardrails for how should CRDs be defined, what should go into deployment CRDs, how should we ensure the CRDs remain to the extent possible vendor agnostic, how should CRD extensibility work, versioning work. All of those constructs need to be clearly articulated so that community members can work within that framework. So that's one. Second thing, in a way, the same philosophy also needs to be applied to CRDs. Operators will be fairly complex as we look at supporting all kinds of greenfield and brownfield scenarios. So can we develop an SDK that makes it easy for community members to build and deploy, support the operators, including version control, including release management, integration into CI/CD pipelines, and so forth, right? So some of this will transcend beyond SIG1 and also is a key capability that SIG2 and SIG3 will build. But some of the key requirements for this SDK will come from SIG1. The next one, almost in line with brownfield and legacy system support, these are very important capabilities to be able to take existing Helm-based, Yang-based, and other open source projects that exist, and being able to have translation adapter layers for converting them into Nephio compatible CRDs. This will increase the appeal and extensibility of Nephio to existing systems. And then lastly, all of this needs to be done in a way that provides us, comfort that the work in terms of CRDs and operator definition really works in practice. So being able to constitute a compliance and certification program across cloud and network function vendors, so that we have a consistent way to ensure the work is compliant to the Nephio design goals and capabilities. In terms of control plane, again, we talked a little bit about northbound APIs. These are early discussions, but potentially based on requirements coming in from northbound systems, including service orchestrators and OSS BSS systems, there may be a need for building additional APIs or UIs to make it easy and seamless for these northbound systems to easily integrate into Nephio. So today, the mechanism like Kandan was describing was CRDs as the northbound API, but then how do we make it even better for users to be able to compose CRDs, right? Create the blueprints as an example. So a design studio like Construct backed by a GUI, potentially backed by an API. These are all early investigations and where we'll continue to make progress. And then northbound APIs to be able to integrate into MSO, potentially supporting some of the TM forum APIs as an example, that MSO and inventory systems can be able to use to program Nephio for intent actuation. There are many other topics that that we did not add to this deck. We'll make sure to publish these key topics of discussion for future roadmap on the Nephio wiki page, and we'll look forward to inputs and guidance from the community on this one. So please don't treat this as the full spectrum, but this is more of a initial checklist of things that have been discussed and have been top of mind for the community. Any questions on this slide?
Yeah, one question. If you could expand a little bit, what do you mean by compliance and certification program? That's not something I'm used to doing with Linux Foundation projects. Just want to understand what you're thinking there.
Yeah, so this is again, maybe Sana, you should also chime in. This is a early thinking, so this is not a well-formed idea. But given Nephio itself, in terms of CRDs and operator constructs, are still being defined in terms of the guardrails that I described earlier, it'll be important to ensure that all the cloud and NF vendors are compliant to these specifications. So the certification program is a mechanism to drive that compliance and bring comfort to the community and to the industry that the work that is being done is meeting those guidelines and those goals.
So maybe some kind of automated verification tests or something like that you run it through to make sure it will work well with Nephio or something like that.
Correct. It could be as simplistic as that. Maybe there is some, vendor labs or other certification labs used by the vendors that we could use for, more complex capabilities which need hardware, support and so forth. Like the exact specifications, like I said, are not well defined, but we clearly see a need for bringing this level of compliance to the program.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And I will also supplement that when we work on the compliance and certification program, there are opportunities that exist in our CNF testing testbed. I think if you're alluding to that, we do have intentions and plans to explore that in the from the CNCF community and make sure that we have some synergies with that LFN project eventually, be able to consume and hopefully learn some things from them. And how do we apply that to the Nephio concept?
Cool. Any other questions on this slide?
I have one question I put in the chat.
Do you mind repeating this? I'm not able to read the chat.
Sure. Okay. Your control plane, if we position MSO as the north side of Nephio, with integration API, what will be the scope of network service support in Nephio? Because originally last year, network service was not part of the Nephio, but I realized so network service along with the network function and the infrastructure. So we still have some separation of the layer, or Nephio wants to handle network services, which are stitching network function together and then choice of the affinity and those things. That's my question.
Kaushik, should I take this one?
Yeah, please, and I'll chime in as well.
Right. The primary focus right now in the community is to be able to manage the infrastructure configuration, deploy the network function configuration. That was the role of the VNF managers, like the way we saw that. Now, some of that service chaining and network function chaining is also becoming a part of Nephio constructs, which is similar to our Nephio in parallel. So my personal feeling at the moment is that the Nephio will take the role of the network function and network service to some extent, while leaving room for some of the higher order service orchestrators to still manage the service end to end. For example, there might be some elements outside the scope of the Kubernetes and containers where the role of the NFVO would still be needed, and something like NSDs might still be written to describe the full end-to-end service. Okay. And I'll let Kaushik chime in and share his thoughts as well.
Yeah, no, I'm aligned with what you described, Sana. I'll just maybe quickly emphasize, we'll continue to do crawl, walk, run. So as what you saw in the R1 scope, we are scoping to a single network function instance as the unit of intent automation now, but we do clearly see the need for network service as the unit of automation that we need to support in the future.
In the Nephio, or you working with the SO? That's my main question.
In Nephio, as Sana described, right? But then
right.
higher level MSO, master service orchestrator, or end-to-end service orchestration is left to a northbound system.
Okay, end-to-end. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
I believe that is what we had. So this was the last slide. So we could use the remaining few minutes for questions.
Kaushik, if there are not many questions, we have 7 more minutes left before the next session starts. So we let the moderator decide if we can wrap up.
Sounds fair.
Okay.
I have a small question.
Yeah, go ahead, Marshall.
So yes, regarding the separation between the MSO role and the Nephio, do you have already a small idea of what will be the separation point in terms of management between what MSO will do end-to-end and what Nephio will do end-to-end?
Marshall, I'll share what I have understood so far. So the way the community is evolving, and we are seeing the extent on the management capabilities of CRDs and operators. So for example, in a 5G core, when we have the control plane and user plane all fully described through the operators and CRDs, sometimes the network function to network function dependencies and mapping is best described and expressed in operators and CRDs, while that was an overlapping function of the NFVO in the service orchestration domain. So I have a feeling that describing the full topology of the 5G core through operators and CRDs might be a best way forward. Like I said in the previous comment to the other question, we might still see a requirement for an NSD to be written on the service orchestrator, because this particular domain is strictly managing the resources on the Kubernetes. We might also see some reconnection requirement to the external networks or some other network functions which are not in the Kubernetes, where I would still see a requirement of an NSD to be written to stitch the Nephio constructs to the rest of the automation templates and describe that in an intent-driven way. So the demarcation is happening use case to use case basis, but that's my view at this time.
Okay, so basically you will say that provide, for instance, a CRD that cover all the core 5G network function in one set and manage that as a whole instead of managing them one by one, and that will be done by Nephio.
Right.
Okay, got it.
Do you see synergy between ONAP and Nephio?
Just one. I'm working for ONAP architecture subcommittee. I think we are brainstorming ONAP and Nephio connection. Okay.
Right. It's a big item on our list, and myself and Kaushik has talked about ONAP many times, and I think we'll also bring it up in the community. The way I see ONAP has been a de facto project that is representative of a lot of industry solutions and projects, and how we work across many organizations can be described through the architecture of Nephio, ONAP, sorry. So making sure that we have some synergy with the concept of ONAP, I think it's a priority. For now, the way I anticipate and I see that the short-term vision for us to build that connection could be that ONAP is an end-to-end orchestrator, and Nephio is the domain controller for your Kubernetes-based deployments. So in the big picture, if you extend a plugin to a domain controller like you do to a vendor Nephio or the VNF manager, could be an extension of that plugin to Nephio, and that's how Nephio would fit into the overall ONAP architecture. And of course, that plugin can be extended to transport, to RAN domain controllers as Nephio evolves its use cases to all these other additional domains. But again, it's a domain controller because it's a Kubernetes-based deployment and we are focusing on CNF through Nephio.
I think we have the same view, and ONAP has SO already. So we are thinking about how to connect that between the ONAP and the Nephio as a domain. So currently, like for example, we control CNF, deploy the CNF in the Kubernetes from ONAP orchestration. That's why we try to, instead of calling the command baseline, we try to define the CID and then more agile declarative, and then applying the Nephio principles. That's the kind of a brainstorming study. Maybe we can work together, ONAP and Nephio. Okay.
Absolutely. I think, Kaushik, it's a good idea, right? We should review that with the ONAP architects and come up with our synergies.
Absolutely. And I think this is broader than ONAP. We're looking at many different OSS communities and other industry efforts, as Sana has mentioned. So what we'll do is we'll produce an internal document within the SIG community about the interplays with other OSS, and then we'll kickstart engagements with the respective communities to further the design.
Right. As we have seen, there is a lot of interest coming on the synergy with ORAN Alliance as well. So I think these are very important priorities, I think, for this year to explore with the community and explore with those project leads and document and publish so that people have some visibility on how Nephio is evolving and will be intersecting with the rest of the community initiatives.
Okay, with that, we're coming up to the top of the hour in our next session. So thank you to Sana and Kaushik.
Thank you.
Thank you for the interest. Look forward to
Thank you.
interesting conversation.
Thanks, everyone.